Stats in a Wrap, the podcast series from Eurostat.
Sina egna karriärer.
Allgemeine Lebensbedingungen.
Strafblad hebt, dat is ook belangrijk.
Me parece importante.
Los países o regiones.
Hello and welcome to Stats in a Wrap, the podcast all about statistics from Eurostat, the statistical office of the European Union. I'm Jonathan Elliot, your host for this episode, and if you're a regular listener, you'll know that we think data are delicious, and there's nothing we like more than slicing and dicing them into delicious morsels here at our Wrap Cafe. And I'm particularly excited about today's episode because it's all about you and me and everyone around us. The somewhat dry-sounding phrase population statistics conceals a vast interconnected world of information. Behind every spreadsheet, table and dataset and every census form in this kind of official statistics, there's a beating human heart. Actually, in the EU, about 449 million of them. These stats are the reason governments know where to build the next school, which town needs a new hospital, and why your local train is always too crowded. But before we discuss population statistics with our distinguished guests, let's step out of the Wrap Cafe for a moment to hear what people on the street say when they're asked about why governments need to know statistics all about them, and all of us, through, among other things, the census.
I think that the census in Europe is being done primarily by the European Union in conjunction with the national governments of each country.
Probably for many reasons. They need a statistic just to know how many people live in the city, or how many people are from Germany or from other countries, or maybe just to know the age of the population, just to have a statistic to use it for many reasons.
Oh yeah, the statistics data office never rang to my door and asked me questions. No.
So today we're peeling back the curtain. We're going to explore what makes population stats so uniquely important and how they can be both an amazing tool for building a better society and a serious test of how much we're willing to share about ourselves with the state that is aiming to improve our lives. With me in the Wrap Cafe today, I have three guests who are wonderfully well placed to guide us through this fascinating and highly revealing X-ray of our lives. Hannah Kiiver is the team leader for population projections at Eurostat. Hannah, welcome to the Wrap Cafe.
Hello, Jonathan. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us. And alongside you, sitting here, is David Thorogood, who is team leader for population and housing census, also at Eurostat. Welcome, David.
Hello there, Jonathan. Very pleased to be here.
Finally, we have Vikat, who is the chief of the population and social statistics section at the UNECE, which is the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Welcome, Andres.
Very pleased to be part of this project.
Let's just dive straight in with our experts now. David, give us an overview. What are population statistics and why are they important?
Population statistics are, I would say, really the central pillar of statistics, both because they tell us a great deal about population and society. They tell us about for example, the age and sex structure of the population and how people are geographically distributed, where people live, where there are collections of the population, where there are large groups of people living together. Population statistics are used as the denominator in a wide range of other statistics. It's very common to hear economic statistics, for example, described on a per capita basis. And for this, we clearly need to have very reliable population statistics, which can be used to actually help us to compare a wide range of statistics across different countries and different regions.
A part of population statistics is the population census, a process that goes back to thousands of years before the current era. It forms a central part of the Christmas story in the Bible, of course. Counting people seems to be a habit of governments almost as old as government itself. Sitting at the helm of the UNECE, we have Vikat with us, who is perhaps able to give us a little bit of a snapshot of what the census is today.
Population census is a comprehensive count of everybody who lives in a country, in an area, and that aims to gather detailed information about individuals there. When we talk about the statistical aspect of it, then it is the total process that the statistical organization takes on. planning, collecting, processing, and later on analyzing and disseminating the data. Special feature is with the census that it can really get to the smallest geographical level, which other data sources normally don't get at. And then it gives a snapshot at the given time. So there is a kind of a comprehensive view on everything at the given time. It allows also to correct possible problems with other sources of data and get really a precise picture.
Now, let's just explain organisationally how the UNECE and Eurostat fit together, because the two of you have a very special relationship. The UNECE has a particular responsibility, and it's not just Europe, is it? Andres, please introduce us to the UNECE and tell us what it does.
The United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, it is one of the regional commissions of the United Nations, and it brings altogether 56 countries from Europe, but also the Caucasus and Central Asia and North America. They all form part of this group. And what we are doing in our organization is to help all these countries work together to develop their statistics, in the case of our statistical program, to develop common guidelines, principles, and recommendations so that nobody is left alone to invent the wheel or a bicycle by themselves, but find the common solutions to common problems.
It sounds a bit like a kind of peer-to-peer modernisation coach, and I look forward to talking more about that shortly. But first I want to go to Hannah. Hannah, these guys, you know, Eurostat and the UNECE, they've got the easy job. They're looking at what's going on today. You are in the unfortunate position of having to say what's going to happen coming down the tracks, at least with the statistical modelling that is your area of expertise. Perhaps you could just give us a quick idea of, well, what your work is and how it fits in with population statistics at Eurostat.
Yes, sure. So first of all, I'm also at Eurostat. So I'm in the double role of using Eurostat data, but also producing Eurostat data. So I have this somewhat unique position. Basically, we just heard how important demographic data is at any point in time to know what the population is right now. But if you think about the political process, how policies are made, you want to know what has to happen in the future, right? You need to know now whether you need to build a school for your population to serve them, or rather care homes. And for that, we need to know how big and how the structure of our population is in the near and long-term future. And this is really what population projections are about. We try to formulate assumptions on what is happening in terms of mortality, fertility, migration, and from that, we derive projected population for the next around 75, 80 years.
Yeah, I definitely think if people have too much data, they can use it to, for instance, blackmail you if they know too much about you. So I think it definitely needs to be kept in safe spaces and not be let for everyone to know.
I don't know, depending on the type of government the country at the moment has. Some governments can be involved in certain kind of corruptions and some governments not. And also it could be misused in the case that, I don't know, is there any leakage, in the data, and someone that shouldn't have the data ends up having, a grasp on it and then will misuse it.
One thing we need to get clear before we move on to the rest of the podcast is an extraordinarily important aspect of all of this, which is privacy. Andres, you're at pains to state that privacy is of critical importance, but in Modernizing and in making the information more detailed and more zoomed in particular, you also risk offending or provoking anxieties about the state prying into our lives. Just talk to us about privacy and that fine balance you have to strike between detail and usefulness on one side and individual confidentiality on the other.
Well, in statistics, we have something called fundamental principles of official statistics. And one of those principles is confidentiality. In short, a statistician is not interested, for example, where Mary is working or what kind of degree John has. What statisticians are interested in and what policymakers would need to know is how many people travel to work in the next town or how many graduates there are in a region. Questions of this kind. We always use the data in a generalized form to produce statistics, and it is important that people understand that there is no attempt even to try to look at them on a personal level. Just in order to get to the statistical data, however, very often the linkage on an individual level is needed to bring the data together from different sources. And this individual level information is used only for this linkage, only for processing for the statistical use. Statistical organizations actually go at great lengths to ensure that it would not be possible to connect the information to any specific person or use the information on the personal level in their datasets.
Now, let's just explain why administrative data is so important here, because the census in particular, and that's at the heart of this, was, and in some parts of the world still is, an immensely expensive and hugely administratively cumbersome process that is so heavy duty it's only used every 10 years now. That's slowly being replaced and modernised. David, just talk us through that transition. We've gone from the people going around with clipboards and knocking on doors to this extraordinarily clever, subtle, algorithmically complex process of linking different systems and bodies of data to replace the old way of doing things. It's an enormous change, isn't it?
Yes, there has been a big change in the collection of census data, but also population statistics more widely. Traditionally, people think of the census as an enumerator or an interviewer coming to each front door and asking questions or inviting people to fill in a form. But of course, governments have a wide range of information already about the population. There are national and regional population registers in many countries, which people have to register in order to become eligible for public services. There are also specific administrative data sources, such as those attached to tax or social security or health services. And in many ways, making better use of these data by taking these individual data and making them anonymous, confidential, and producing aggregate statistics from them offers benefits both in terms of the speed in which statistics can be produced. It also reduces the burden on the population because people no longer have to complete a census form, for example.
I think the birth rate is declining because just less people want to have children.
So maybe the countries like Germany, the Netherlands, and England would have less births, and countries like Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, where faith is still strong, would be higher.
People don't want to have children. Like, for example, I want to focus on my career before I start a family, because I don't want to be like an egoistical parent who doesn't take care of their children. I'd rather have my career and then decide later on.
I want to jump forward now and look to the future. Hannah Kiiver at Eurostat. There are two words that need to be clarified here in statistical modelling, aren't there? One is projection and the other one is forecast. They sound very similar in everyday usage, but of course they're massively different in practice. My understanding is that a projection is a scenario-based estimate of some future situation, and it explores what might happen in different conditions. And a forecast is more of a prediction of what will happen based on what's happened in the past. Have I got that even vaguely right?
Basically, if you think about a forecast, what you're trying to do is to describe as accurately as possible what is going to happen at a certain point in time. So if I look at population, I would like to know as accurately as possible what the population is next year or in 5 years. That would be a forecast. I can use any sort of variable or models to derive that. We don't do that. We use projections. And the difference here is that we have a methodology to derive the population based on a set of assumptions. And these assumptions are what really matters. As long as I get the math right, projection itself will always be correct in a way. I derive it based on the assumptions I make on how many children will be born, how many people will die, how many people will migrate. But I can make different assumptions, right? I can compare different assumptions and I get different projections, but each projection in itself can basically not be wrong. And that's a bit the difference between talking about a forecast and a projection. So basically what we attempt to do is to look at fertility, mortality, and migration patterns in the past and try to formulate these assumptions on how they will develop over the next 20 to 75 years, depending a bit on the type of projections.
And those three things you mentioned there, births, deaths and migration, are critical because they tell us about the aging of Europe's population, among many other things. Tell us about why that's important.
I'll start with mortality because in a way it's the easiest to model because with the exception of the COVID period, we've really seen an increase in life expectancy, so a decrease in mortality rates over time. And we understand what influences mortality quite well. So it's relatively easy to make some assumptions on how mortality evolves over time, which generally we assume that life expectancy increases, mortality rates decrease with a certain speed, and then we can derive how many people are expected to die given a certain population at each point in time. For fertility, it's a little bit more complicated at the moment. If you are a little bit interested in demography, you may have heard about the demographic transition. This model described development from a society with high mortality and high fertility to one with low mortality and low fertility. And in the EU, all countries had this transition already around the late 70s, I would say. Since then, we've had these relatively low fertility rates below 2.1, which is the replacement rate we need. So you can think about it as each woman needs to have, on average, 2.1 children over their lifetime to replace the population. Approximately since the late 70s, we have a dip below that rate in all EU countries. Since then, the total fertility rate has decreased further, and there are no real models to describe this behavior. We don't really know what is going to happen. We can observe patterns, we can observe trends, but there are no good models describing what is likely going to happen in the long term. What is harder to model are shocks to migration. We haven't mentioned migration yet. Generally, it's almost impossible to formulate good assumptions about migration because it's really volatile. It's affected by many factors. The data quality in comparison to the other two factors is a bit lower. We've seen in the recent past that military aggression, which led to the mass inflow of refugees from Ukraine to the EU, was completely unexpected at the time. And length of the conflict, the size of movements could really not be anticipated. I would say we're working with good guesses.
So how does faster, more readily available data and perhaps more detailed data enable you to do now what you were not able to do before? How is that helping your work?
Well, generally, the faster we have data, the better we can estimate what is happening in the very near future. So in the next year, in the year after that, obviously. Because right now, when we publish the projections, many countries already have data for the first year of projection available, or at least they have an impression of what is starting to happen. So, of course, if we could use that data, that would make the projections a little bit better. So faster data will always help.
Now, we've got speed and frequency of data to feed into population statistics. And we've touched on the increasing detail or granularity. And this word does crop up a lot. David, granularity and the ambition for detailed, more zoomed in, specific data. Why is that important?
I think the issue is that for many official uses, it's clearly important to know about national or the situation at national level or for large regions. But for individual users, a lot of their interest is in their local area, in their town, or indeed in their neighborhood. And so there is a lot of pressure from users of statistics to actually have more geographically detailed population statistics. One of the developments which has happened in a number of countries around the world, particularly in Europe, and also now for the first time in the 2021 census at a European level, is to produce population statistics at the level of a standard 1 kilometre square grid. So for each 1 kilometre grid square across Europe, we have a range of population statistics, which can then be combined according to the types of area that users want. Traditionally, statistics are produced for particular predefined regions, but a user may want to know, for example, how many people are living within a certain number of kilometres of a river or a certain distance from a hospital, for example.
It does make me think, I've got a son who's madly into Minecraft, and it makes me think that, that in the old days you were living in Minecraft. now you're hoping to live in high definition TV where you're not seeing all these blocky people and you're getting a little bit of a grip on what's really going on.
Yes, it is a little bit like that, I think. But really, once you get down to the level of 1 kilometre grid square, you can provide a great deal of geographical information. One of the advantages of this is that it can be flexibly aggregated to form new areas which meet the specific needs for particular analysis. I mean, one of the things which I know people are interested in is to look at the population within a certain number of kilometres of a particular pollution source. By having data out for the 1 kilometre grid squares, you can form new areas according to the needs of the analysis. It also allows analysis to be undertaken across regional or indeed international boundaries. You could combine the population living on one side of an international border and the population living on another side within a certain number of kilometres of a geographical feature, such as a river.
That's fantastic. Let's turn to technology now. Andras, tell us about what new resources are now available thanks to more technology in our lives. I'm thinking about things like, mobile phone data, for example. And just to be clear, this is the data of where phones in general are being used and not individual identifiable handsets, and certainly not the content of phone calls being made.
Indeed, these are some of the really important ways in which technology shapes statistics on population. For example, in places where it is difficult or impossible to conduct direct surveys, satellite data can support estimating the size and distribution of the population of those areas. Mobile data can be used to detect patterns of daily or weekly moves, and for the understanding of where people spend their time. Using scanner data from shops and web scraping online commerce data are already well-established ways of improving data collection on prices, which is needed to calculate the inflation rate. And speaking of technology now, the big issue is artificial intelligence, AI, which has entered the world of data in important ways. It can greatly simplify the processing of the large amounts of data that statistical organizations work with, and it can help to code the open text information into understandable codes. Also, it can support research, analysis, and communication. Right now, statisticians are very much concerned with the fact that the generative AI models find their data, find the correct and trusted statistical data when they search for information all over the web. So AI is bound to bring rapid developments into the work with data as it is to change our lives in important ways.
Fantastic. Well, there's so much more we could say about the subject, but we have completely run out of time. I have to say a huge thank you to our contributors today. Hannah Kiiver, Team Leader for Population Projections at Eurostat. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
And David Thorogood, who's Team Leader for Population and Housing Census at Eurostat. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And finally, Andres Vikat at the UNECE, Chief of the Population and Social Statistics section. Thank you so much for your contribution today.
Very pleased to be part of this project.
If you've enjoyed Stats in a Wrap, don't forget to follow us on social media and share our adventures with friends and colleagues, where the show can be found on Spotify, Apple, and all the usual places. And if you'd like to know more about the topics covered in this podcast and practically every aspect of statistics in the EU, you should make your way to Eurostat's amazing educational resource, Statistics Explained, which is packed with infographics, videos, and explainers of all kinds. It's really worth checking out. And of course, come to the Wrap Cafe for the next edition, in which we'll be investigating the story behind the stats that track the careers of women scientists. It's a fascinating tale, and to find out more, join us. But until then, goodbye.